Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Yo, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to Underground Wellness Radio, brought to you by undergroundwellness.com. So nice to be back. Today's my first day back after a really long and super awesome, 5 or 6 week vacation. Had an absolute blast, fully recharged and just ready to rock and roll, getting started with my main man, Dr. Kalish, tonight on the show. You guys are going to love this one. We're talking about his new book, The Kalish Method, which you guys can find in the UW store. I read half of it a few days ago, and I read the other half of it this morning. Absolutely fantastic book. Very easy to read and get through. I know you guys are going to dig it. Again, that's in the UW store, Amazon.com, everywhere. And you can learn more about Dr. Kalish at kalishresearch.com. If you guys want to call in during the show, the phone number is 347-237-5608. One more time, 347-237-5608. Call in, get on the air with Dr. Kalish. Got to thank our guest hosts for the past 5 or so weeks, Diane Sanfilippo, Dean Dwyer, Elliot Hulse, Evelyn Lambrecht, Jimmy Moore. You guys absolutely crushed it, and I really appreciate everybody tuning into those shows. Those shows did really well. Those shows actually did better than my shows. I was a little, disturbed for 2 seconds, but that's awesome. You guys love the guest hosts. We'll certainly be bringing them back in the very near future if I ever want to take some time off. Facebook and Twitter, facebook.com/underground wellness, twitter.com/UG wellness. Gosh, I'm just so pumped for tonight. It's going to be awesome. The goal of tonight's show, we've had Dr. Kalish on a couple times in the past few months, and we definitely don't want to be redundant, so we're going to be covering some different things from his book on top of the depression things we've covered in the past. But what I want this show to be, because we have a lot of new listeners who have just became listeners since the Real Food Summit, what I want this show to be is the go-to show. If you have friends or family members who have just been in and out of the doctor's office, taking different prescription drugs and whatnot, just dealing with symptoms but never getting to the root cause, just kind of on that treadmill, not really going anywhere with their health, ending up with a lot of side effects. In fact, I want this to be that go-to show that you can send them to say, hey, there's another approach out there. Check this guy, Dr. Kalish, out and listen to what he has to say, because it really makes a whole lot of sense. So check it out. The man really needs absolutely no introduction. Again, his website is kalishresearch.com. His book is The Kalish Method, Healing the Body, Mapping the Mind. Dr. Kalish, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Sean. I really appreciate being here again.
Thanks for coming on again, man. Always we have some really good conversations here, and the audience really digs it. You get a lot of listens. Hey, most of my audience knows about you, and so I really don't want to go into all the background and all that stuff, because most of them got that. But you tell a story really early in your book about a patient named Barbara, and how she forever altered your approach to healing others. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a key to what our goal for the program is tonight, is to get people a basic understanding about what functional medicine is about, so they can start to get the right kind of care that they need. That's the big picture. So, Barbara walks in, and I've been in practice for a while, maybe 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And she walks in and sits down, and, usually patients are pretty, deferential maybe is a word, or at least polite when they're working with a doctor. But she just sits down and just stares at me and said, I'm fat, I'm fatigued, I'm depressed. And then she just shut up, and she didn't say anything else. She just kind of looked at me like, so what you going to do about it, kind of thing. And you know how it is when you're in an awkward social situation and you just kind of panic. And so my mind just kind of went somewhere else. I didn't do my usual, I'm Dr. Kalish, I'm important kind of spiel. And I just had to come up with something on the spot that was just going to work. And it all kind of crystallized in my brain in like a millisecond, and I realized, wow, you know what? I've been hearing the same kind of complaints from people for 10 years, and now I actually understand that I've actually had thousands of cases just like this. There's a pattern here. There's an underlying theme that causes people to get fat, fatigue, depressive, female hormones, and digestive problems, and all these big 5 things that I talk about all the time. And I'm just going to look at this more as a system-wide failure than as a bunch of different symptoms. And so we all talk about wanting to get to the root cause of problems, and that's kind of theoretically what it's all about, but to actually have a system, a method that you can go through so that if you are suffering from one of the big five, the big five in my practice are fat, fatigue, depressed, female hormone problems, or digestive problems. If you got one of those big five problems going on, what are the system-wide problems that have occurred that have allowed that to happen? And so Barbara kind of pushed me to understand that I could start to communicate to people on a systems level instead of just talking about fixing individual symptoms. And that was a breakthrough.
So is that what you would call the Kalish Method?
Yeah, and the Kalish Method is basically like functional medicine for dummies. It's a very simple way of looking at the body systems and a really simple way of using labs to analyze what could be wrong with you that basically ignores all of your symptoms. Basically, we ignore all symptoms in our analysis.
These body systems that you're talking about, there's three of them that you outline in the book. What are the three?
Yeah, so it's hormones, digestive, and detox systems. Hormones, gut, and detox. Those three are the major players.
So when these three major players go offline, we'll say, let's say someone's stressed and their hormonal system goes out of whack. Is it kind of like a domino effect and everything else gets worse as well? How does this work?
Yeah, exactly. So it's one thing leads to another. So typically, there's some kind of initial stressor, emotional stress or physical stress of some kind, either dietary stress could be or inflammatory stress, and that pushes the stress hormones out of balance. So then you develop in the very beginning a stress hormone problem. The stress hormones regulate digestive tract immune function. So if you have enough stress problems for long enough, and this could be your mother-in-law yelling at you, it could be the fact that you were in Iraq for 2 years during a tour of duty, it could be the fact that you're eating too much gluten and sugar, it could be any one of these kind of stresses. Your body's going to break down in the same predictable way. The immune response in the gut fails, and then we start to get different kinds of digestive tract infections and different kinds of food reactions in the gut. And if that goes on for long enough, your toxicity levels build up, your detox pathways fail, and all of a sudden you have a detox problem. And that predictable sequence of adrenals messing up the gut and the gut messing up the detox pathways probably happens in 90 to 95% of the people that I've tested. Pretty predictable.
In the book, early in the book, you write, and I found this really fascinating because actually I've been kind of dealing with this myself, and that's one of the reasons why I took so much time off. You write that your original health problems have a 95% chance of happening within a year or so of your being under emotional stress. Why is this so often the case?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because you wouldn't think that would be a trigger, but we're designed to be under a certain amount of stress, like the stress of I'm sitting on the beach eating a coconut, tiger jumps out from the jungle, chases you for an hour, you're either dead or you're in a tree, and then the stress is over, and then you're back at the beach an hour and a half later eating another coconut and waiting for a couple months till the tiger jumps out at you again, right? So we're designed for short periods of really intense stress. What we're not designed for is for, commuting for an hour and a half each way every day, or for being in, any kind of a environment or any kind of a situation that puts chronic stress on the system. And so when chronic stress is put on the system, people start to break down. And it's so predictable. It's just like as predictable as anything else that breaks down in this world. It's as predictable as, crashing your car into another car over and over and over again every day. I mean, your car is going to be destroyed. So it's what takes us out. We have good hygiene now. We have clean water, basically, and we have access to medical care. People are not dying from tuberculosis or influenza or that kind of stuff that may have killed us, hundreds of thousands of years ago. Mm-hmm. But this chronic stress problem is just accelerating, and it's causing more and more people to get sick. And when you think about the diseases that we all die from, heart disease, cancer, those kinds of problems, even things like diabetes, have a pretty big stress/diet component to them.
Mm-hmm. Give us a little bit of nerd talk when it comes to this topic of adrenal exhaustion or adrenal burnout, because a lot of our audience are really smart people out there. Talk about like the cortisol side of things and the exhaustion side of things that you go through a little bit in your book.
Yeah, so in a normal, healthy individual, when you're under stress, your cortisol levels shoot up and then they drop back down and you're good. When the stress remains chronic, the cortisol levels stay high, and that normal feedback loop that tells your brain that the stress is over snaps. So then you end up in what we call stage 1 of adrenal exhaustion, which means that the cortisol levels are high and they're staying high day in and day out, even if the original stress is gone. So that means you're trapped in this high stress loop. You know, we have a term for it, this little more modern term that's called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. That would be an extreme example of someone, they're in combat for a year, they're high stress. When they come back out of the war zone, they just can't shut it off, right? That's an extreme example. You could also have someone in like an abusive marriage or a situation where they're in a job that they hate for a long period of time. And again, that cortisol shut-off mechanism in the brain snaps. So the way that the body's rigged is we have what's called the HPA axis, so hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and your brain is basically controlling the adrenal glands and telling them, okay, there's stress, okay, now there's not stress. And that normal mechanism of regulatory control of the brain directing the adrenal glands snaps when you go into adrenal exhaustion and the cortisol levels stay high. And if that goes on for long enough, then the cortisol levels start to progressively burn out, and you go into what we call stage 2 and then stage 3, where the cortisol levels go lower and lower. People get more and more fat, more and more tired. And somewhere around stage 2, most people start to notice symptoms show up. Speaking about symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stage 1, adrenal exhaustion, actually most people kind of like it. That's like a go mode, right? That's I'm working 80 hours a week and I don't really need to sleep, or I go to a rave every Saturday night and I stay up until 6 the next morning and I'm fine. You know, people are going and they don't realize that their health is starting to get impacted yet. Mm-hmm. And when they crash down to a stage 2, they'll start to notice weight gain, fatigue, female hormone problems, if it's a woman, digestive problems, heartburn, IBS, all this stuff starts to come up because as cortisol levels are crashing, this other stuff is my favorite kind of tech talk thing to talk about, which is called secretory IgA or SIG-A. Mm-hmm. So secretory IgA is the thin, healthy kind of mucus substance that lines the mucosal tissues of the body, like the gut lining. And cortisol regulates SIG-A. So as cortisol levels drop, SIG-A drops, and those immunoglobulins, those immune defense or, cell factor thingies start to fade out and lower, and so then your gut becomes like an open target for the next bad thing to come along.
Mm-hmm. Stress ruins the immune system. I know all about it. Man, I've had 3 sinus infections this year alone. Like that's one of the reasons why I took some time off. Like we did 3 launches in like a 9-month period. Like I'm still not 100% right. You know what I mean? But I'm very aware of it at the same time though. How do people find out like what stage they're in? Did you do specific testing for the hormones?
Yeah, so you do. I think there's a self-help component to all this where, you take breaks like you just did, you eat well, you do a paleo diet, you work out hard in the gym. There's all that self-help kind of stuff, which is critical. That's the most important stuff. But if that's not enough to bring you back from the brink and you've done your 6 weeks of vacation, you're eating paleo, you're working out hard in the gym, and you're still having all your symptoms, then I think you need to reach out for help. You find someone like me, someone I've trained, someone that knows this stuff, knows the functional medicine stuff inside and out, and you get some lab work done to get things fixed. And I think that's kind of the role of the doctor in this. The doctor is the person to help you when the lifestyle changes aren't enough to turn things around.
So you do saliva testing for the hormones. You also very frequently do stool testing with your clients. How often do you find, quote-unquote, gut bugs in the stool?
Yeah, so, it's a little, I don't know, maybe not so representational of the world at large, but most everybody that I work with has a problem, some kind of health problem, one of the big 5 usually, fat, fatigue, depressed, female hormones, or GI problems. So in those people that we test that, are taking the time to see me and pay all the money for the labs, probably 75, 80% of the time we find 1, 2, 3 different gut bugs going on all at the same time. The thing is, it's totally predictable, right? Because if you're under stress and your immune system weakens, the SIG-A stuff drops, right? And so remember I said mucosal membrane, so that would be lining of the sinuses, like you got sinus infections.
Exactly.
Some people might get bladder infections, some people might get colds and flus, but what we all get when the SIG-A drops is gut bugs, because your gut is just this massive, 30-foot long target for every infection that's out on every door handle in the United States to just get in and get into your, right? So it's just a huge target, and it's really easy to pick up gut bugs.
So you're talking about like parasites, bacteria, fungus, H. pylori infections, which I would find all the time when I work with clients, things like that?
Yep, exactly. It's just, the more burned out your adrenal glands are, the lower your SIG-A is, the more likely you've picked up infections. We had, I think our world record holder in my training program was a doctor, and this just came up about a month ago, and the doctor found this one patient had 7 infections. It's not funny.
Are you serious?
7 infections. It's one of those things where it's so bad you got to laugh or you're just going to jump off a bridge, 7 infections at the same time. It's like, oh, man, how are you even getting up in the morning, And people just persevere, People just suck it up, and they just deal with the fatigue. They deal with the diarrhea, constipation, gas, bloating, heartburn. They just... it's remarkable to me how much people can survive when you see these labs coming back in. It's just incredible.
Does it become this vicious cycle, though, where the adrenals are tapping out, you have all this stress, you have immune system issues, and then you've got the gut bugs. So the gut bugs, do they become a stress for the body and actually start to harm the adrenals?
Yeah, and that's why people end up on downward spirals, because you're right, the mucosal immunity weakens, you pick up the gut bugs. Now that say you're walking around with 3 different infections in your gut, and those are generating inflammation and tissue damage that then causes more adrenal stress. So the adrenals get dragged down even more. You're absolutely right. And then over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, the person just ends up eventually being very depleted.
One of the systems we haven't really talked about much is the detoxification system. We've gone over the adrenals and digestion. How does a poor digestive system impact the body's ability to detoxify?
Yeah, so the old-fashioned term for this is they call it autotoxicity. You go back to the turn of the last century in the 1900s, 1910s, somewhere around in there. And the idea is pretty straightforward, is that if you can't digest and absorb nutrients very well, all kinds of bad things start to happen in your gut. Bacteria are putrefying, food is putrefying and rotting. Bacteria are feeding on all kinds of undigested food. And all these negative processes generate toxins, harmful products, which your body then has to try to eliminate. And basically, all the junk that's accumulating in your gut gets thrown right at your liver through the portal vein. So, there's a direct, separate blood supply that goes from your intestinal tract directly to your liver. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's an unusual part of the body. It's called a portal vein, but it's carrying blood directly over, and so the liver just takes the brunt of all this, and the liver is then trying to clear out all these potential toxins. And if you have too many toxins coming out your liver, then the detox pathways in the liver break down, and then what happens is the toxins just continue to circulate through your bloodstream rather than getting kicked out of your body. And that is not a good thing, because a lot of these toxins are fat-soluble, and they penetrate directly into the brain and cause all kinds of problems, anything from like brain fog to fatigue to, and it could even be something like a migraine headache from this kind of a toxicity reaction. People have sleep problems, all kinds of issues start to pop up when you're toxic. And the other thing that's kind of weird about toxins is, we store a lot of the toxins in fat tissue, so people tend to get bloated and have fluid retention in relation to the toxins as you're trying to buffer them. And then they also tend to hold on to body fat as a sort of a storage mechanism to try to keep those toxins away from the brain. In a way, it's your body's kind of trying to defend itself in a sense.
When you're working with patients who have these big 5, are you using medications for protocols? Is it natural supplements, diet and lifestyle modifications? What are you doing?
Yeah, so right off the bat, more than half of all these problems are taken off the table if people eat right, exercise, get pretty good sleep, and manage their stress. So right off the bat, you do the lifestyle changes always first. And that's, I think, the thing that makes functional medicine special is you address those issues first, or you should really. And then there are non-prescription supplement programs to fix all the adrenal problems. And all these years of practice, 18 or 19 years, well, I'm getting old. I don't know how this all happened. Almost 20 years of practice, I've never had a patient who we needed to prescribe any medication to fix their adrenals. It's pretty sophisticated. The supplement programs are pretty sophisticated. They've been around for a long time. They're very effective. And then for the gut-related problems, that's mostly diet changes. And sometimes, depending on what bug we find, there may be an herbal program that you can do. And for some people, if it's more serious, then they may need to do some prescription to treat a pretty serious infection. That happens occasionally, not too often. And then to detox people, that's all right back to supplement protocols. We measure the liver detox pathways, and there's a whole bunch of them. There's products that people have probably heard of, like N-acetylcysteine, methionine, taurine, antioxidants. Also they're used based on the labs to support liver detox processes. So those are the basic protocols, and probably 95% of it is done without prescriptions, almost all the time.
Yeah. What I like about the book is a lot of this stuff is in there as far as the dietary changes, going on a gluten, soy, dairy-free diet. You talk about rotation diets in there, reducing stress, improving sleep, removing environmental toxins as well, which is huge. I think that's one thing that a lot of people are overlooking, getting rid of the toxic products and replacing them with more natural, non-toxic things. I think more people out there need to do. We're talking with Dr. Kalish, author of the Kalish Method. We're about 20 minutes deep. If you guys want to call in, the number is 347-2375-608, 347-2375-608 to get on the air with Dr. Kalish. Let's get into depression for a minute here. I posted a quote from your book on Twitter and Facebook today, and it made a little bit of noise, and the quote goes like this: "The level of serotonin in the brain does not correlate with depression." If this is the case, Dr. Kalish, what are the underlying causes of depression?
Boy, that's going to get me in trouble, isn't it? So, this is all lab-based information. So it turns out that plenty of people have normal serotonin, if it's measured properly on these labs, but are still depressed. Now, how could that happen? Well, you just think about it for a minute. That could happen because the neurons themselves, the nerve cells themselves, aren't firing properly. And there's a little bit of tech talk. I won't get too much into it, but there's basically, the way your brain is wired is there's two neurons in a series. I think about it like two balloons in a bathtub, right? You got a presynaptic and a postsynaptic neuron. And then between the two, you have this space called the synapse. If there's not enough serotonin in the synapse, then, of course, nothing's going to work properly. And that does occur, but it's not the most frequent problem. What's more common than low serotonin is that postsynaptic neuron, that second neuron in a chain, isn't firing properly. And it's just like if a spark plug was fouled in your engine, right? You got plenty of gas in the car, but the engine's not going to fire if the spark plugs aren't working. So if your postsynaptic neuron is damaged and it can't fire properly, you're going to have the symptoms of a brain-related problem like depression or like anxiety, simply because the nerve cells aren't conducting signals properly. And for people with that kind of a problem, they need to get their serotonin or dopamine levels up beyond the normal range in order to get the nerves to fire. It's pretty simple. And you can measure all this on the testing, so it's not like we guess about it. It's pretty basic.
So you can actually get a picture of the brain by way of testing to figure out what people need and what they don't need?
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. It's like taking an X-ray of a broken bone. You can actually see the neuron itself. We're actually measuring the functioning of the neuron in relation to how well it can fire, if it can fire properly or not. This is kind of the breakthrough testing that I do now.
Yeah, that's pretty darn awesome. Before we get back to some of that testing, let's talk about head trauma and toxins. What role do they play when it comes to depression?
Yeah, and I would expand this out to depression, compulsive overeating, anxiety, sleep problems. If you have either head trauma or some kind of a neurotoxin in your system, then that postsynaptic neuron, that second nerve cell, is going to be damaged. It's not going to fire as well. And so you could have anything that triggers that. It could be lead or mercury or arsenic. It could be a bicycle accident where you hit your head. It could be a horse, fall off of a horse. It could be a sports injury. It could be like the hockey players and football players that we're seeing come out now and admit to all the depression issues from repetitive head injuries from their sports, right? So it doesn't have to be a dramatic single injury. It could be playing football for 15 years and just having small head injuries week after week after week. Or it could be any kind of a thing that you associate with veterans, where they're in a Humvee and it gets blown up and there's head trauma. The important thing, I think, is that these neurons, the postsynaptic neuron, that second neuron in the series, is equally damaged. It doesn't matter whether it's killed by a chemical or killed by blunt force, right? It's like the difference between someone being dead whether they were shot or stabbed. It doesn't really matter. The neuron's dead is dead, whether a chemical killed it or whether some kind of physical trauma killed it. You have the same exact problem with the lack of firing, right? Because when a certain number of neurons are dead, you don't have normal firing. So you end up with the same kinds of, this is why symptoms are so meaningless and misleading, because you could have depression, anxiety, compulsive overeating, or fatigue caused by either adrenal exhaustion, low serotonin, low dopamine, poor neurotransmitter firing. There's no way you can just think your way through whether your anxiety, depression, compulsive overeating, or fatigue is coming from one of these variables without having some kind of science behind sort of discovering where that is actually about. And the symptoms overlap so much that symptoms can be quite misleading if you're trying to attribute this for that kind of theory. This symptom is caused by that problem, It's just not that simple a relationship.
You got to make sure you cover all your bases. When someone comes to see you as a patient, are you taking them pretty much through the same system, since you're not really worried about or concerned so much with the symptoms?
Yeah, I really am. And it's not to say that we don't care about relieving human suffering, because this is all about getting people to feel better. So, but it's kind of like the compassionate thing to do is to say, okay, we see what the symptoms are. Let's talk about that for half an hour, figure out what's going on in your life, and then to say, well, let's actually just do an analysis of the different systems and see where the breakdown is, and rather than basing it on my personal opinion or what you think is wrong or what Google thinks is wrong with you, to actually do some lab work and say, okay, well, there is these 2 or 3 different problems that are causing these 5 or 10 different symptoms, and track it that way. Now, of course, you do get symptomatic relief when you do the body system approach. It's just a little different. It's like, when I used to have a lot of old BMWs in my life. I have new ones now, but, when I would bring my old car in, if I just told the mechanics, it's not starting, that was a symptom, there could have been, at least a dozen different reasons why a 30-year-old BMW wouldn't start. And so they don't take me too seriously at the BMW shop when I just bring the car in and say it's not starting. They don't really know what that means. They have to do an analysis, right? It's no different than how you would treat a car. It's just a basic kind of systems analysis.
Yep, makes a whole lot of sense. With your systems analysis, you're checking the brain. And one thing that I found very fascinating from your book is what the kidneys have to do with the brain and the brain has to do with the kidneys, and how all of that affects and impacts depression and mood. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I know. It's an amazing thing. I don't know who the design team was on this one, but you got to just thank them for doing it this way. So there's these structures in the kidneys called transporters, and the same exact structure, genetically identical structure, exists in the brain. So when you hear about these drugs that people take for depression these days, they're called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they're inhibiting reuptake. That reuptake actually is describing these transporters. So the transporter is like a gate. It's like a gate going to your backyard. The gate can be open or closed, right? And these transporters, or reuptake pumps, or reuptake ports, a bunch of different names for the same thing, they exist in the brain, on the neurons themselves, and they also, strangely enough, exist in the kidneys. So when you take amino acids at a high enough dose, these transporters, or reuptake pumps in the kidneys, start to change their position, just like a gate going to your backyard starting to swing open. And as that gate opens, the neurotransmitters flow through the kidneys, and at the same moment as those gates open in the kidneys, they open up in the brain. So by doing a urine test, you're able to indirectly measure what the neuron itself is doing just by watching what the kidneys are doing. And this is it's kind of a breakthrough and it's kind of not. Like, this information has been around for a long time, but the kidney physiology people don't really talk a lot to the neuroscience people. And so there was sort of a disconnect between what everyone learned about the kidneys and what we all knew about the brain. And it just took one person to kind of tie this all together. And that man is mentioned in my book quite a bit, Dr. Hims. You know, he basically figured out, wait a minute, these kidney guys are talking about something that the brain guys are talking about. And look, we can see a direct impact of this on a urine test. So now you get basically a urine test that's an indirect, exact measure of what your brain is doing. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating stuff. To get these brain neurotransmitter levels working properly and to get the gate swinging open, you have specific protocols or specific supplements that you use for that. This isn't a supplement sales pitch or anything of that sort, but you use tyrosine and you use 5-HTP. We've covered this on previous shows, so if the audience wants like the in detail answer to this, go back to some of the other shows that I've done with Dr. Kalish, but talk about why you use those two together.
Yeah, so 5-HTP is the precursor to serotonin. And when taken by itself, it will only bring up serotonin. Tyrosine is the precursor to dopamine, and when you take it, it'll bring up dopamine levels. And the idea here is to achieve a sort of balance between serotonin and dopamine based on the labs. You can do some generic programs. We talked about them in earlier talks, but if those aren't enough to really get your brain balanced, then you can start to do this mind mapping technique where you actually measure the gate position. You use 5-HTP to open the serotonin gate. You use tyrosine to open the dopamine gate, and then you start to get the levels up. Oh, and you want to hear my new tech thing that's like so cool you won't even believe it?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, this is something everyone's got to Google like right away, like before you get off the call even. You can Google it now and I won't feel bad. It's this thing called DARP32, DARPP 32. DARP, it sounds like a Star Wars movie kind of thing, but DARP32. So the Nobel Prize in Medicine in the year 2000 was given to the guys that discovered this DARP32 thing. And it's kind of the key to all the stuff that we're talking about in terms of how dopamine postsynaptic neurons are regulated. So check it out. It's super techy, but it's very interesting because they've discovered now how the brain regulates itself through this DARP32 mechanism and dopamine. It's really kind of amazing. And that was, I don't know, that was the year 2000. It was 12 years ago. They gave the Nobel Prize in Medicine out 12 years ago.
And we're just now catching. See, you're that guy who will find this stuff out, which is totally cool. You know what I mean? And kind of keep us abreast of what's going on out there. I'll certainly be looking into that dark thread. I just Googled it, as a matter of fact. You say, or we've talked about in the past, and you also mentioned in your book, how standard depression treatments actually make the condition worse. Can you talk about that? And on top of that, can you maybe add in a little bit about Alzheimer's and the whole dopamine and serotonin thing?
Yeah, so to back up one step, so if people have what's called like moderate to severe depression, that means that you're not getting dressed and leaving the house. You know, you haven't taken a shower in a few weeks. You don't shop and cook your own food. If you're at that level of depression, then these drugs can really help. But for what we call mild depression, which is, you still go to work every day, you still have personal relationships, you still talk and function, in the normal world, then, all the long-term research studies show that the long-term use of antidepressants causes all kinds of problems because over time they actually deplete the same chemicals that they're trying to boost up. So every SSRI medication over the long term depletes serotonin. And there's a really great book about this called Anatomy of an Epidemic by Whitaker. It's a huge and wonderfully written book by this New York Times reporter about how long-term use of these medications causes a lot of problems. And all he really did was go out and read all the long-term outcome research to see what the research showed, and he just reports on it in the book. It's a scary book, though. It's scary and depressing, but it's probably something we should all read.
Mm-hmm. So
because, they've known about this for decades. It's just been hidden.
Mm-hmm. So you say increasing your serotonin with 5-HTP alone will, over time, reduce your dopamine, correct? And vice versa?
Yeah, using a single amino acid will deplete the opposite neurotransmitter. You're right. So taking 5-HT by itself for a long time will deplete dopamine, and taking tyrosine by itself for a long time will deplete serotonin. And taking any SSRI medication for a long time will deplete serotonin as well.
You map all this. Yeah, it's crazy. You map all this out in the book as well. Alzheimer's is something that comes up quite frequently. I get a lot of emails about that, and it's something I really, honestly, I don't know a lot about, but there are a lot of side effects to the Alzheimer's medications. Do they have anything to do with this dopamine and serotonin thing you just got done talking about?
No, that's a different phenomena than the antidepressant medications. And Alzheimer's is probably the most difficult of all these brain conditions to work with. The doctors that I work with, is a pretty strong network of doctors that do these labs. We estimate, and this is not based on my practice, but on other practices, because I don't work with a lot of elderly patients, but some of these docs do, the ones that are based out of Florida. Tend to have, geriatric practices where most everyone they're working with is over 65. And they estimate about a third of the people they work with dementia and Alzheimer's do not respond at all to these brain programs. About a third respond partially, and about a third have nearly complete recoveries. So it's a mixed bag. There's no guarantee, that with Alzheimer's that these programs will help. But it's certainly worth a try if you can find a doctor that can help with it.
Let's move to weight gain a little bit, because I know a lot of people out there are dealing with that. There's a lot of people with severe weight issues who are depressed, and they've got anxiety issues, and they've got digestive problems as well. I know I've worked with a lot of them when I was working with clients. Is this the same experience that you have in your clinic, and why does it seem like these all occur together so often?
Yeah, I know. This is one of those constellation of symptoms that sort of stimulated my whole revelation with Barbara, is that, you see a variety of problems that reoccur with a lot of frequency in almost like predictable patterns. And that's why, kind of the big five is present for a lot of people. Fat, fatigue, depressed, female hormones, and GI problems, digestive problems, all together at the same time, the same person, is actually pretty common. And I think a lot of that just revolves around how the body systems break down. And so, in other words, like, for example, you're under adrenal exhaustion, your cortisol burns out. Cortisol is a glucocorticosteroid, right? It's a blood sugar stabilizing hormone. So as your cortisol crashes, your blood sugar is unstable, so you're going to crave sweets and carbs. You're also going to have damage to your fat burning metabolism because cortisol regulates fat burning. So now you got bad fat burning and you're eating a lot of carbs and sugar, which is going to get you to gain weight. At the same time, you can have digestive-related issues, so you're not absorbing the nutrients that you need from your food. Okay, now we're on to body system number 2, right? Body system number 2, your gut's not working. People tend to eat until their minimum nutrient requirements are met, so you're going to keep being hungry. If your gut's not working, you're not absorbing well, you're just going to simply overeat. And on top of that, most people end up with yeast overgrowth, fungal overgrowth in the gut, so again, they're overeating carbs and sugar. And then at the same time, you get all these toxins we talked about dumped onto the detox pathways. That starts to break down. When your body's toxic, you're going to hold on to fluid to buffer the toxins, and you're going to store fat at all costs because you need that fat to act as a storage site for the toxins. So now you've got adrenal and digestive and detox components to the weight gain. And, if you take that mix and you do, a stomach surgery and you reduce the person's stomach, or you give them a bunch of diet pills that are amphetamines, you're really not going to be causing a whole lot of good. The person may lose weight for a little while, but you still got these basic systems that are crashed. And that seems to be the state of affairs now for, I guess, 60% of Americans are overweight now, so it's happening to the majority of the American population at this point.
Yep, and we're not getting to the root cause of it. I know, again, from working with clients of my own, getting them to follow the eating program can be very challenging. Now, you've got the big five, but do you think we can add addiction to that big five? Because it seems like a lot of people are addicted to some of these foods.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think addiction is like an overarching thing that affects almost all of us in some way, either directly or indirectly. So we're addicted to carbs and sugar. We're addicted to some foods that could actually be neurotoxins, like diet sodas. That's a perfect example, right? People that have 5, 6 diet sodas every day get addicted to the neurotoxic effect of the soda. Or you can see, with fast food, people get addicted to the chemicals they put in fast food, and it becomes hard. Well, it's that whole, you can never eat one Oreo kind of thing, right? You get started with these foods that are processed, and it's really hard to stop. So I think food addiction probably affects at least 60% of the patients that I work with. That's not an easy thing to solve. I think that has a spiritual and emotional component, which is huge, which I don't really work on. I'm not like a spiritual counselor or whatever, but that is something that they need help with almost all the time to deal with that component. And then what I can help with is just basic physiology, which is stopping the cravings. You can stop this is kind of an interesting little factoid. And I don't know why this happens, but it's what happens. One of the first, if not the first effect for just about every brain program I've ever done with amino acids is the cessation of food cravings. It happens in the very beginning of every program. It's sort of strange. It's like the first thing to happen. Now, that doesn't get people to lose weight, but it does reduce their compulsive overeating, which obviously eventually gets people to lose weight.
So there's a tie between, or linking, I should say, addiction and the neurotransmitter issues that people are having?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's one of the key things about dopamine and also to serotonin is that you develop food addiction problems when either those chemicals are low or if the neurons aren't firing properly. And again, you'll see that as one of the first things that clears up when you start to get the brain balance in the very beginning.
Gotcha. I got a few more questions for Dr. Kalish. Again, call in. If you want to call in, 347-237-5608, 347-237-5608. Let's take a few Facebook questions, see if you can answer some of these here. This one's from Sean. Is there an ideal weight distribution pattern? Is altering weight distribution possible through targeted nutrition and supplements like diindolylmethane, or is HRT necessary? What's your take on that?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't get that. I don't know that we get that specific. That we're, the one thing that's obvious, that's almost always present, is that if you're under adrenal stress, you're going to store fat around your abdominal organs, so your belly gets big. And when people get out of adrenal stress and they start to burn fat more appropriately, that kind of stored belly fat goes away. But I don't really work with programs to more detail than that. And that obviously is a hormone balancing issue.
Gotcha. Here's another one from Tracy. It's actually a really common question. Is there a safe standard starting 5-HTP or tyrosine dosage for people who cannot afford all the frequent testings? Are they taken together or without food?
Yeah, so usually it's better to take them with food for a variety of reasons. It's usually a little better tolerated. And you can take 100 milligrams of 5-HTP along with 1,000 milligrams of tyrosine with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So 100 5-HTP, 1,000 tyrosine, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you get any negative side effects from it, just stop. You shouldn't. It should only make you feel better. And taking them together with food usually works the best, even though you're going to read about how they're better absorbed on an empty stomach. Turns out that's not so important.
Where does B6 fit in there?
B6 is essential for serotonin production. And so, if you're going to do this properly, you also need to be on a multivitamin of some kind, or at least a B vitamin. But a multivitamin is better because the other stuff you need to make these chemicals includes B6, calcium, vitamin C. Those are all essential.
So
and you can get all that from a multi, right? So
are they taking this multi just once a day, or are they taking this multi?
Yeah, once a day is enough.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's do another one from Sarah. She asks, is there a natural way to lower prolactin, and is there a natural way to get the body to increase its production of female hormones to what it should be? She says, I'm talking just over the high end of normal with a small pituitary tumor present in terms of the prolactin.
I wouldn't give advice about a pituitary tumor because I don't know enough about them. That's more like an endocrinologist kind of question. But for sure, the majority of women that I work with have low progesterone and low estrogen, and one of the first things we do is get those levels back up.
Gotcha. And how do you get those levels back up? Just
well, the adrenal programs usually take care of about half of it, and then you can get bioidentical or natural plant-based progesterone for younger women, let's say under age 45 or 50. And for women that are over age 45 or 50, we'll use the plant-based progesterone or bioidentical progesterone along with some bioidentical estrogen if we have to.
Gotcha. But we don't want the audience going out and just doing these protocols willy-nilly. We want to make sure they get tested and find what works right for them, correct?
Well, here's where I draw the line, like safety first kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't, it's just common sense here. Never take a hormone. Never take a hormone unless you know what your levels are. Melatonin is a hormone. DHEA is a hormone. Progesterone is a hormone. Even if it comes in a cream, it's still a hormone. Estrogen is a hormone. A lot of these things are available over the counter, but it doesn't mean they're safe. In Europe, they're all banned unless you have a prescription. So just be careful. I would never take a hormone. I wouldn't take one myself, knowing all that I know, without a lab that shows that I need it. Now, this other stuff, like amino acids and vitamins and minerals, it's much harder to trigger a problem with.
Mm-hmm. I've got your book, The Kalish Method, in front of me. As I said earlier, phenomenal book. It was great. I breezed right through it. Good stuff. Great illustrations. Carrie did your illustrations?
Yeah, they come out good.
Yeah. Carrie rocks it. Carrie Medeiros, GracelineStudios.com. Guys, if you guys ever need any graphic design work, get with Carrie. She totally rocks. The Kalish Method itself, is that your method? Did you come up with that?
Yeah, it's my simplification of a lot of stuff that was taught to me. So there's nothing new in there that I made up. I just grossly simplified it so you could understand it easier. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like my book. I've learned all this stuff from different people. I just kind of put it all together in the Dark Side of Fat Loss. Exactly. Who's this book? I mean, who would you say that it's for? To me, it was really easy to read, but I have a little bit of background in this stuff. Is this for practitioners? Is it for patients? Is it for everybody? Who's it for?
Well, it's a good question because it's not a self-help book at all, because there's plenty of other great self-help books out there, and that's not really my niche. It's more of a book for people that want to learn how their body systems work and want to eventually find a functional medicine person to work with. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be someone that I train, but I do believe that functional medicine, I think everyone should have a functional medicine practitioner as, just a go-to person. And so this is sort of an introduction to that concept. So if it makes sense to you, you're kind of educated enough, you can go out in your community and find someone that does this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Whenever I use the words functional medicine or naturopathic medicine, and I'm talking to people in person, their eyes kind of glaze over, like, what the heck is that? Why don't doctors use this type of approach?
Yeah, it goes very much against the grain of conventional medicine. One of my favorite quotes from my buddy Dr. Jay Cohen, who's a medical doc. I was having kind of an existential crisis a few years ago, and I was like, why don't medical doctors do this? They should all be doing functional medicine. And, he just looked at me and said, Dan, that's why they call it medicine. They prescribe medicine. It's about, and that's not a bad thing. It's about you have an infection, you're going to lose your leg, you get some medicine. You have a major problem with Parkinson's disease, you get some medicine. So, I think conventional medicine is about medicine. It's basically about the appropriate use of drugs, right? And that nobody can hold in their head at the same time everything you need to know about conventional medicine and be an absolute expert at functional medicine. It's very, very challenging. So most doctors pick a lane, and they either prescribe prescription drugs and whatnot, or they focus more on functional medicine. Now there's a few that do both well, but that's pretty rare. You have to have some extra large brain capacity to be able to be a really good conventional doctor and be a really good functional medicine doctor at the same time. That's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller from the 310. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Trey. I'm calling in reference to my mom, and you just mentioned the P word, Parkinson's. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but we were thinking more it actually could have been really the restless leg syndrome. She doesn't have a tremor. Regardless, they've had her on Cinemet and Mirapex for quite some time. I guess maybe past year and a half, year or so, and at a pretty high dosage, about 2,000 milligrams of Cinemet alone. But either way, she hasn't really had any good results. She's not getting any sleep. She's getting severe kind of just the trauma of not being able to sleep and the exhaustion she's getting, and she doesn't have a whole lot of appetite. I've been trying to get her to take any kind of supplements from cod liver oil to beef liver to what have you, just try and get some better nutrition in her, and definitely talk to her about eliminating things like wheat. but just kind of was wondering about this and kind of understanding more about the thyrazine and 5-HTP and all the rest of that.
Yeah, so with a Parkinson's patient, you can't use the amino acids unless they're being really carefully monitored.
Mm-hmm.
It'll interfere with the drugs that she's on and could cause a big disaster.
I guess more the thing is we've thought that she really doesn't have it. Even one of the latest doctors we've gone to has agreed that she probably does not have Parkinson's. It was misdiagnosed. And so it probably was just the restless leg. So
restless leg and Parkinson's are similar in that they both involve a high level of destruction of the postsynaptic dopamine neurons, right? Just like we were talking about earlier. Just this whole DARP32 thing gets into how these neurons fire. So in someone with Parkinson's or restless leg, they exhibit very similar patterns of damage to the postsynaptic neurons that are regulated by dopamine. And so you have to, if the medications aren't working, you can test and bring up the dopamine levels to the point where those neurons start to fire. But it's a really challenging process. It involves a lot of lab work and a whole lot of supplements. I've done it many times. It's doable. If you're co-managing the case with a good neurologist, you can pull it off. And Parkinson's and restless leg end up showing very similar dopamine-related deficiency levels, which is maybe why they often get confused with one another when you're trying to diagnose them just based on talking to the person,
Sure.
You can go check out hinsmd.com. He's got a paper on Parkinson's there that just presents a case, hinzmd.com, and look up the Parkinson's case study that he published, and that'll give you a starting point.
Can you spell it again?
hinzmd.com, and just look for the Parkinson's paper on that webpage.
Great.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Trey.
Yeah, I'll look at it. Thanks so much.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the 540. You're on the air. What's your question for Dr. Kalish?
Hey, Sean, this is Dave from Virginia.
What's up, Dave? How's it going?
It's going great, man. One of my questions is, Dr. Kalish, you said that the program is simplified and that people can join in and get a certification through you. Is that certification as simplified as what you're talking about?
Oh, the training programs I have are for teaching practitioners how to do functional medicine, and we have a variety of different 3- and 6-month certification programs. But that's kind of a separate topic. But I do teach doctors how to do functional medicine. That's actually what I spend most of my time doing now, more than I work with. I still do work with patients part-time, but most of my time is spent training doctors.
Okay. That's awesome.
But you need to have some kind of a medical license, chiropractic license, something like that to do the training programs.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Have a good night.
You too.
All right. We got 2 callers from the 310 coming up. We got 310-318 and 310-746. So let's go to 310-318. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Randy, and I'm calling from California.
Hey, Randy. What's your question?
I actually have 2 questions. The first one is there a place we could contact you to give us a doctor that you've trained in an area so that we could find a good functional doctor within a certain area?
Yeah, just go to kalishresearch.com and send us an email through the office there.
Okay. And then my other question is for my mother. Do you have any suggestions for somebody who has acute diverticulitis?
Oh, see, now, this is a good question because this is like a global question. Anything that's acute is has to be coordinated as a interaction between conventional medical doctors and the functional medicine people, and the conventional doctors always should go first. So, assuming that the person has a really complete GI workup and they've been seeing a GI doctor for a year or 2 and they've got all the medical stuff under control, then you can do some of the functional medicine testing and figure out what's driving the problem. But, functional medicine does not work really well for, severe acute problems. It really doesn't.
Okay.
It's not what it's designed for primarily. It's really more designed for low-grade or chronic problems, long-term problems, but not things that are kind of a little more emergency-oriented.
Well, what about, I think it became an acute problem, but she had, I think it's called diverticuli, when it's not diverticulitis or something. She's had it for over many years, but it just recently, I guess, got aggravated by something, had to go to the emergency room, that sort of thing, and they call it diverticulitis when it
yeah, so if she's past the point where the emergency doctors have said nothing more we can do for you, and she's kind of in that zone, then you could come back and do some functional medicine work appropriately.
Okay. All right, great. I'll send an email and get a doctor out in her area. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Randy. All right, let's go back to the 310-310-746. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Chris. I'm in Southern California.
Hey, Chris, what's your question?
Well, my wife has got severe depression and general anxiety disorder and PTSD. And she's been on various SSRIs for about the last probably 12 years or so, 12, 13 years. And she was on Zoloft and Trazodone and Klonopin. And over the last year, we've switched to a real food diet, and she's lost a little over 100 pounds, and she's actually still losing. One of the things that's really changed is, a lot of these psychological issues have really eased off since we've switched the diet. So she's actually gone off the Klonopin, mostly gone off the Trazodone, and cut down on the Zoloft, to 100 milligrams. And so we're looking at starting the amino acids because the Zoloft seems pretty much completely ineffective at this point. So I guess my question is, should she completely discontinue the Zoloft as she starts the amino acids? I mean, I guess because, hearing you explain how the SSRI works and it, basically, keeps the free serotonin out there, which then gets broken down. So would the SSRI basically counteract the amino acids, or is it okay to still take the Zoloft while we're doing the amino acid therapy?
This is a tricky question. So you don't want to make her worse.
Right.
Number one. And sometimes, and you have to work with a psychiatrist to taper off the Zoloft.
Which
sure.
Yeah.
You do have one, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And he's completely supportive of medications that she's gone off, and he's also said, that she could, because she's been tapering down the Zoloft, that she could continue just to taper it down to nothing when she feels okay doing that.
Okay, good. Yeah, you never, just for everyone else that's listening, you never want to take yourself off an antidepressant because they all have different tapers, and you need to make sure you work with a psychiatrist that can tell you what the safe way is to get off the drug. It always ends bad if you just all of a sudden decide to stop your SSRI without some guidance. So assuming you have a psychiatrist involved, which you do, and that he or she is kind of sanctioning and monitoring the taper, assuming all that's in place, and then you can start in with the amino acids, as I mentioned earlier, 100 5-HTP, 1,000 tyrosine, 3 times a day. Stay on those for at least a few weeks or a month, and then go back to the psychiatrist and have him or her help you continue with the taper, having gone on the amino acids first, then go back and continue on the taper as the doctor instructed. But I really mean it. Don't ever try to taper yourself off an antidepressant. It's a really dangerous and bad thing. You need to have a psychiatrist like you guys do, who's user-friendly and open to helping you all get off the medication. That's the only safe way to do it.
Right. All right.
And then what happens is that the amino acids revitalize the Zoloft. They make it work more effectively again because you're all of a sudden getting the nutrients that are missing.
Well, that's cool.
Chris, you have a follow-up?
No, I think that was pretty much it. Other than I just got to say, Sean, you're amazing. So.
Thank you
Oh, and
very much.
a final little thing, but Sean is amazing. I don't know where he came from. I know he's like the coolest guy too, and he's like, I don't know. It's like everyone in my profession is such a dork. It's nice to have someone who's cool that's doing this work, but myself included, I'm in the dork category. But one last thing is there's a really good medical doctor down in Southern California in the LA area. If you need some help, email me and I'll get you in touch with him, okay? To help
that would be great. All right, excellent.
All right, guys, I'm over here blushing. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you calling in, man.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. Phone lines are open. I've got one or two more questions for Dr. Kalish. Takeaway message, that you want everybody to get from your book. What would that be?
That there's hope for all these problems, and we're all trapped in this nightmare of the symptoms that we're talking about, and it's understandable. You look around and you see how the world is, but that there's hope and people get better, just like the caller we just talked to, 100 pounds of weight loss and getting off her medications just from changing her diet. So I don't want people to give up on hope, even if you've tried a dozen times to do things. There's new technology, new techniques out now that can really make a difference for people.
Mm-hmm. Your book is The Kalish Method, Healing the Body, Mapping the Mind. Your website is kalishresearch.com. I got an email from you yesterday about a webinar that's going on tomorrow. Is that for everybody? And if so, how can they find out about that?
Oh, that's one of the doctor webinars.
Okay.
But, we do have, if you're a sophisticated patient or just kind of like a science nut and you want to just learn more, I don't think we have any way of telling that you're not a doctor. You can at least listen to the doctor webinars, and they're free. It may be a little over your head occasionally, but I think a lot of my patients actually kind of sneak on those webinars and listen to them because I can kind of see their names in the corner there, which is fine. If you're really into it and you want to learn more about the technical aspects of this stuff, I think it's valuable if you learn it and then you go find a doctor that understands it. You'll have a better discussion.
How does somebody get on your email list?
Go to kalishresearch.com and sign up. As long as you realize it's mostly a doctor email list, so you're going to get like doctor-ish kind of emails about free webinars and stuff.
Cool deal. And your book is on Amazon.com. It's on my website as well, and it's great stuff, man. We really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it as always.
All right, Dr. Kalish, have a good night. Thank you.
Bye now.
Yep. Good stuff with Dr. Kalish. Next week, Troy Casey, the certified health nut, is going to be on the show on Tuesday. And don't forget to stop by the Underground Wellness Store, pick up Dark Side of Fat Loss, Paleo Summit, Real Food Summit. We've got a JERF, Just Eat Real Food T-shirts coming out next week. I'm on a 2-day week. I'm going on a 4-day seminar. But when I get back, we're going to launch the JERF shirts. People have been asking about those. And that's pretty much it. I wrote a blog today. It's on undergroundwellness.com about the lessons I learned during my 6-week vacation. It's going to be getting quite a bit of love on Facebook, so check that out. I'm out. Thanks for tuning in. You guys have a good night. Peace.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.